was even something called culture jamming. I don't know if you know the term, but it's...
I'm not familiar with that term.
They had a thing where these people went into a toy store and they took talking G.I. Joes, these talking G.I. Joes and Barbie dolls.
Mm-hmm.
So they took them and they switched the voice chips.
Oh dear.
So then they went back to the toy store and put them out there, and then kids were, like the kids would buy the boys would buy the G.I. Joes, and it was a feminine voice. And they'd buy the Barbie dolls and it was G.I. Joe. And it sort of brought an awareness of war and being a dainty little doll. So when that happened, that made people question things. So culture jamming is basically spurring awareness.
Okay.
So will we want to get rid of those people who make, do those sort of nutty things? No, because in a way they make us pause, they make us reflect, they make us say, oh, maybe we don't have to be all soldiers or Barbie dolls, and maybe,
they make us more aware.
Exactly. But yet some people want uniformity. No, we don't want negative elements. We don't want what we perceive as people who are causing problems, but those,
See, but in my diagram, I guess, community nurtures individuals, individuals contribute to community. As soon as you stop nurturing the individuals, the community stagnates.
Exactly.
And it can't develop, it can't progress, it can't be empowered, it can't resolve its own challenges, it can't do what it needs to do unless it nurtures its individuals, because the universe or God puts those individuals in that community to help it deal with those challenges. But the only way it's going to happen is if you keep that cycle going. That when somebody comes along who is totally off the wall, you remember their value as a person, you allow them to be heard, you allow them to be loved and to be embraced, you consider their ideas carefully, you may not do exactly as they recommend, but you allow them to create dialogue and awareness and possibilities for constructive change.
Well, there's a richness and diversity, and I look at my own Dharma where I am today, that was a result of interacting with many different types of people. I mean, I lived in Texas, which is a very conservative place, but I learned a lot about community there. I lived in New York City, and I learned a lot about business and communication there. So, and now we're in Denver, which is a different milieu. But I've learned from many people, so everybody is my teacher. Everybody is assisting me to grow as a person, but I have to be receptive. So if you're trying to do your Dharma and just fixating on your path, you can still succeed. That's not bad, but I find it personally enriching to engage other people who have very different points of view. And that's what our president is trying to do. I think that's what you do. And you learn from that. You grow from that exchange, that interchange, that interaction, rather than being pigeonholed and narrow-minded in tunnel vision, which constricts growth. So I think what's going to thrive, what's going to help our planet thrive is that constant interaction of different ideas, even if we don't always agree with them, even if perhaps we don't want to engage the Islamic community. If you're judging them, if you engage them and learn about them, you might find that they have the same concerns that we do. We just need to open up to each other and learn from each other. And that's doing our Dharma, is engaging everybody, opening up, being open to that flow.
Well, and there may be something from their perspective that was not visible from our own. In terms of grammar, I never really understood certain cases of verbs until I studied German. Because in English, it's all the same word.
Right.
And I got to German, and all the words were different for each different case, and it made it absolutely clear what an indirect object was. Until I studied German, I couldn't quite get a real clear understanding of what an indirect object is, or of how to identify it within a sentence. But of course, as soon as I went to studying German, it was black and white, clear as could be, because of the ways that language is constructed. Which is where I really advocate and encourage everyone to be multilingual. Because there are things you will learn by studying other languages they kind of blend into the wallpaper in your own language. I did a very brief foray into Russian, and recall reading a book that said Russian has no verb for to be. Because as the book described it, you can't say the man is tall because there is no is in Russian. And the assumption was that if the man didn't already exist, there wouldn't be anyone to say tall about. So you don't have to say the man is, because if you say the man is tall, or the man tall basically is how it would translate, I guess, but there wouldn't be anyone to say it about if he wasn't so there'd be no point in saying it unless he was already there. So you're being redundant.
I guess they can't do it to be or not to be.
Well, and I'm wondering how they translate it.
I am, I guess, like Popeye, I am that I am, or something like that.
I am what I am?
I am what I am.
Well, or the story about Moses and the burning bush in the Old Testament portion of the Bible, when the bush says, I am that I am. You know, in Russian, does it just say I?
Well, you bring up a good point about how we have different viewpoints and perspectives, that diversity, because people may have a whole different other way of languaging or expressing themselves, and unless you take the time to sit and maybe understand their thinking, to put yourself in their perspective, it is incomprehensible. You know, like when people say the word of the Bible is absolute, it's the word of God. Well, the Old Testament and the New Testament are very different books. The Old Testament is a God of judgment and, you know, and hellfire, whereas the New Testament is Jesus loving people. They're totally like the opposite. So that's very confusing. But if somebody believes it's the Word of God, and even if it's paradoxical, they're going to believe in it, then for me to communicate with them, I have to at least understand that concept. Not judge it, but simply say, okay, I understand what you're saying. I may not agree with it. You know, and that's been part of my Dharma too, is trying to understand different perspectives and going beyond judgment.